You're watching Capital City Sunday.
Thursday's presidential debate sets the stage for a historic matchup between President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump. CNN's debate of qualification window closed with just Biden and Trump being eligible to take the stage. Under CNN's criteria, candidates are required to appear on a sufficient number of state ballots to be eligible to win 270 electoral votes, maintain 15% in 4 separate national polls of registered or likely voters that meet CNN's standard of reporting, and meet guidelines laid out in the Constitution to serve as president. Both Biden and Trump agreed to the rules CNN announced last week. The debate will run for 90 minutes with 2 commercial breaks. Microphones will be muted unless a candidate is speaking. The most notable change, there will be no audience in studio during the debate. Here with me now is Rick Klein, political director for ABC News. Rick, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So, Rick, I want to start off with, what are some of the issues we are likely to see both former President Donald Trump and President Joe Biden highlight on Thursday's debate stage?
It's interesting because both candidates say they want the biggest message to be the choice. They want this to be viewed as a one-on-one matchup, and they like their odds when that happens. Donald Trump, I think, is going to be talking a lot about the border, a lot about crime, a lot about inflation. I think Joe Biden is going to be talking about the rule of law, going to be talking about threats to democracy. May even bring up the fact that Donald Trump was convicted of a crime just a few weeks ago. So much different messaging. I imagine there'll be some personal attacks in there. Another thing I've heard from both campaigns is they want to look forward. They want to start talking about what they would do as president, not just what they did as president or what the other guy did, but really contrasting those visions in a more positive light. We'll see if that holds.
How big would the conversation on abortion play out in this debate?
Well, if you're Joe Biden, you'd like to have the whole debate basically be about women's rights and abortion in particular. If you're former President Trump, you'd rather steer the conversation somewhere else. He has never had an easy time in actually explaining his own position or explaining the position of the Republican Party. He has taken credit for, I think rightfully, naming the Supreme Court justices that overturned Roe versus Wade almost exactly 2 years ago. But he hasn't really liked the consequences as much, and he's changed his position. I think you'll hear him talk about it as sort of an effort by the Democrats to change the subject when they're talking about that. But I think that's very much what's one of the top 2 or 3 topics that the Democrats and Joe Biden want to talk about all the way through November.
And Rick, this debate is taking place before either candidate has been officially nominated as their party's nominee. Candidates are typically nominated during their party's convention. Will the timing of this debate have any impact on President Joe Biden's or former President Donald Trump's support among voters?
Well, I think it sets the stage for what's to come. As you mentioned, this is way earlier than we ever see presidential debates, a full 3 months before any debate has ever happened in a general election before in history. So I think you recognizing that people aren't going to vote for many weeks and months. And as you mentioned, the conventions, including the Republicans in Milwaukee and the Democrats in Chicago, are still weeks or even months away. There's lots of time to make up ground. But I think in terms of kind of starting the campaign season, this is about as good an unofficial marker as you're going to have the 2 candidates on stage, the 2 men that could be the next president, face to face like this. I think is going to enter this campaign into a more intense time and a more intense conversation.
Rick, the rules accompanying this debate, from no opening statements, microphones will be muted unless it is their turn to speak, and unlike previous years, there will be no in-studio audience. How will these new rules shift what we've seen in previous debates between the 2 candidates?
Yeah, it's going to look a lot more like the original presidential debates back in 1960, the Kennedy-Nixon debates, which just happened on studios with journalists moderating, and that's it. Takes away a lot of the outside distractions. This is something the Biden team pushed for mostly. The microphones, the lack of an audience, they feel like that suits them, that Donald Trump is more likely to kind of feed on the energy of a crowd. The Trump team feels like they just got Biden to agree to debates, and that's a win for them. But it will certainly look and feel different. And hopefully it adds to a more substantive conversation to not have a crowd be a factor like that, and to not have microphones on for both candidates the entire time.
And finally, Rick, I want to get your perspective. Third-party candidates like Robert F. Kennedy did not qualify to take the debate stage. What will that mean for his campaign as an independent candidate?
Well, he's filing legal action to try to get there. I think it's unlikely to be successful, but we'll see. I think, though, a third-party candidate needs oxygen. You need exposure, and this would have been a huge opportunity for him and his supporters in his campaign. That not happening, I think, is something of a blow. We've already seen his fundraising numbers begin to dip. The question is, does he have another kind of move in him to try to build some support back and get him back in the conversation over the summer?
Political director for ABC News, Rick Klein, thank you so much for joining us on the show this morning.
Thank you. Thanks again for having me.
Ground was broken this week on the Center for Black Excellence in Culture in Madison. How the center's founder says this will uplift the Black community in Wisconsin, and why they chose to break ground on an important day in American history.